Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name's Camille and today we are talking about how to write short fiction. Before we get started, I do want to debunk a sort of common myth about short stories. I think a lot of short story writers go very wrong, or a lot of novelists who try their hand at short stories end up going very wrong. Because it is a shorter piece of work, I think that some people assume that it takes less effort and it takes less pre-planning and less attention to detail to write a short story. And I think that is completely wrong. The thing about short story is it is the art of implication. A short story is knowing when to show versus when to tell. And the only way you can get an idea of when to do these things and how to do them is to know your world or the setting in which your story is taking place. If you have cultures or magic or family dynamic or courting rituals relevant to this story, you need to know them and you need to flesh them out and know them well. Your main character is the very pinnacle to a short story. It's a short piece of fiction. It's very tight, close together. There's not a lot of room, as there would be in a novel, to really show a character arc. But at the same time, you don't want to just tell your reader, this character was weak and sad, and then by the end, tell the reader, this character is now strong and courageous. It's a very subtle art, and it's almost more difficult, I think, to write a very compelling short story than it is to write a novel. So the big things are you need to know your setting. You need to know and flesh out your character and really have the character pinned down to a T. You need to know what all of your plot points are, but you also need to know how to combine plot points. How to imply a certain plot point has taken place to move forward. Like I said, it's a short story. You don't have a lot of room, but it's a full story. And the real craft in telling a story is how you deliver this information to the reader and then how the reader feels at the end of your short story. Does your reader, after reading 3,000, 5,000 words, can you make a reader feel sad with the character who didn't get what they want? Can you make the reader surprised that the last scene or the last line in your short story completely unraveled and changed the beginning of the story? So these are all things to keep in mind. A short story is not by any means any easier, and it should not be slacked upon, especially because so many people do write short stories with the idea that it's easier. They choose to write short stories because they think it's going to be simpler and take less time instead of writing novels. And this is untrue. Every short story, for the most part, I think 90% of the short stories that I've read in, the really big science fiction and fantasy magazines are all excellent. And they contain every single piece that a story needs. Every single piece that you'd find in a novel are in these short stories. It's just the author knows the craft of implication, of knowing when to show versus when to tell, and all of these things. I have not had any of my short stories picked up or published yet, so like the rest of my videos, you can just take this with a grain of salt. But I'm just going to go through a couple things with you guys, things that I've learned from my own writing, and things that I've picked up from some really great mentors and published short story writers and published short stories that I really loved. So the first thing, and this is with any story, is I need an interesting premise. I need that one idea that really just gets me excited for the story. However, an interesting premise is not enough. When I say interesting premise, what I mean is that crazy thing, it's maybe maybe there's robots, something like that, or maybe we're in a post-apocalyptic landscape. Maybe it's like an Alice in Wonderland thing where someone falls into a different world, etc. The problem with this interesting premise idea, though, is it's used as the hook often in short stories. It's what grabs the reader's attention, and it's usually first line. You have so little room to work with that you really want to throw that hook out there immediately. But a lot of these hooks are overused. Post-apocalyptic landscape, robots, kid falls into a fantasy world. These have been done and overdone. So once you have that interesting idea, you need a second. You need to be able to cross this interesting idea and then make it relatable. There's a short story that I really love called Today I Am Paul by Mike Shoemaker. And his premise in the story is that there is a robot, but the robot can change their appearance and the robot works in a nursing home. There are plenty of robots. There are stories about robots. There are plenty of stories about shapeshifters, people who can change their appearance. But Martin takes these two very interesting overdone premises and combines them, but then adds a factor of relatability. He puts this shape-shifting or able to change their appearance robot and puts them in a nursing home. And that's the hook. That's what really draws us in because, it's two interesting premises, but it's fresh and it's new because this combination is not seen very often. But then they're working in a nursing home. So then we assume, before we've even read the text, that, this is going to be some sort of family story, relationship story, maybe someone's sick, etc. So we get the fresh, interesting combination of premise, plus we get relatability right off the bat. And that's very powerful. And these sort of really great ideas don't come overnight. Idea generation is one of the most free-floating concepts. No one can really pin down how to generate ideas, but it can be anything. If you're reading poetry or listening to music, it could be an interesting line that catches you. Perhaps you enjoy art and you can stare at pictures of art and interpret that into be some sort of story. But yeah, so there are a lot of short stories with great, interesting ideas, but they need to be fresh and new. Okay, so the next big thing that I do once I have this interesting, premise, idea, and I start working like a setting, a really interesting setting that I want, that's a great way to add something new and fresh to your premise. I think about character. Character is very important in a short story. It's important in any story. Characters who your reader relates to or latches onto. Unless you're writing flash fiction, but that's a totally different video. So, character. I am a pre-planner when it comes to novels, but for short stories, I'm very much a discovery writer. So it is very hard for me to pin down how to do all these things. But basically what I do is I come up with an interesting character, and just like the premise, there needs to be something vitally interesting about the character. How the character relates to the magic. Maybe they made a really big mistake, and that's what the story is about. It could be just they are not satisfied with their life, and they have to go through this story to attempt to become satisfied. Something like this. But you really need to know your character. And what I do for the story with the premise in mind, I do a character monologue. If you've watched my other character videos for when I'm writing novels, I kind of force it. I give everyone hobbies and like a personality, label and quirks and things. Not for a short story. My main character for a short story, I have the premise in mind, and I think, what part of this world or setting or premise could my character be attached to make them interesting or strange or emotionally unstable or mysterious or intriguing or unhappy or unfulfilled? And then I have my character do a monologue where I basically trying to get inside the head of this character living in this setting with this sort of premise, whether it's a magic or whether they're a robot or whatever. And I have the character tell me who they are in a very vulnerable way, telling me their deep secrets, the deepest parts of themselves, that they hate, relationships that they've had, things that they enjoy doing, things that they hate doing, and all of this. And I really get to know my character. And then I go into sort of the mice quotient, but not really. It's more of a character arc. The great thing about a short story, and my favorite short stories, have a character who starts one way and ends a completely different person. And that's a great thing about story in general, is we love to see how the characters change. So I go to the monologue for my character, and I basically say, okay, this character is starting out as broken, or this character is starting out as unsatisfied or unfulfilled, or they're struggling with their circumstances, or they're struggling with this magic or this premise or this family dynamic. But then I say, okay, how do I want the character to end? Do I want it to be a comedy or a tragedy? Do I want the character to get what they want or to not get what they want? And then that's when I start going into plot. But a great story for character change is 26 Monkeys, also The Abyss by Kiz Johnson. Her character Amy starts out as, she has something missing. She has a hole. She is unsatisfied in her life. She pays $1 for these circus monkeys, starts taking them around and throughout the story. And then at the end, she is content. It's a beautiful, fun story. I'll link it below. I definitely recommend reading that, as well as the Martin Shoemaker Today I Am Paul story. So, plot. I plot a short story the same way that I plot a novel. I do have my videos up on plotting, but then, and so it's, there's the hook, and then there's the inciting incident, what shakes up the character, what changes. In one of my stories, a character finds a magical hedge maze. In one of my stories, my character learns that he is meant to ferry the dead souls into a new realm. It's what kicks off the plot. And then I go into sort of the dread anxiety plot point. It's like the 1/3 mark where the reader should start to be very connected and invested in the character and start fearing for their safety, fearing that the character may not get what they want. And then I do, 2 or 3 try-fail cycles. Like I said, I'll tag that plotting video up here, but a try-fail cycle is basically the character tries to get what they want, and either yes, they do, but it gets worse, or no, they don't, but it gets worse. It's the yes, but no, and. It's yes, they get what they want, but something else goes wrong. No, they don't get what they want, and it gets worse. And then I go into the low point where my character feels like there's no hope. And then I go into the climax and then the resolution where I close out the character story. However, those are a lot of points to include in a 3,000 or 5,000 word short story. So then it goes into dictation, the craft of words and languages and sentences, the craft of using the correct word and putting these things together. So let's say, I'm writing the short story. Well, I can have the hook and the inciting incident in one scene. I can imply the hook very early on and introduce the inciting incident at the end of that scene. And scene is a very curious thing. A short story doesn't really need scene breaks. However, I include scene breaks in my short story just because it helps to slow down the pace a little bit. You're using such fewer words and sentences and pauses and breaks. So I do like to sort of slow the story down just so that it feels like more time is passing, but you don't have to. And it's really hard to explain sentence structure and how to write and how to convey this information, but the basics are, every scene should be doing multiple things. So if you open the first line of your story is the hook, and then you go right into the character and then right into the inciting incident, plus you are introducing, an aspect of the world or something, that's a great scene. That is a full scene that can be very intriguing and mysterious, and there are things happening. But how do we do this, and how do we change up the pace? Well, and one tip I can give you is you don't want every sentence to be the same length. You want to have pauses. You want to change things up. You want to have like a short sentence and a long sentence. Another thing you can do if something's very important is do a line break, have a single line of text, and then continue on the story. And it's really just using the right word and having all of the pieces. Make sure you at least take one sentence to set the scene. Let the reader know where the character is. If they're outside in a valley, make a reference to the trees, the grass, and the mountains. If they're in a city, make sure to reference the tall buildings, the honking horns, and the passersby. If they're on a cliff, make sure to point out the hot, humid weather, the dry dust in the air, and the blazing sun. That's another problem with short stories, I think, is things like setting the scene get left out. But a reader can pick up on the talking heads idea where two characters are just exchanging dialogue, but the reader has no idea where they are. So make sure to set the scene. Make sure all of your scenes in this short story are doing multiple things. And make sure you imply things. You don't need to expressly show everything that happens. You can tell certain things. You can say a week later or time passed. You can say this character, I don't know. You can adjust verbs and nouns and things in short stories. You do want to try and stay away from too many to be verbs. He was, she was, he is, she is. You want to stay away from those because that causes a barrier between the story and the reader. Instead of saying he was sitting on the couch, say he sat on the couch. That's a great way to cut your word count and a great way to really pull the reader into the scene. He sat on the couch. He held a beer in his hand and clicked the button on the remote. That gives a great picture of a scene instead of saying he was sitting on the couch, he was holding a cold beer, he was flicking through channels on the TV. Cut the was. There are instances where you may need the was, but this comes back around to my last submitting short story videos. Read your story out loud, and you will pick up on when you should use a to be verb. If you're telling in the right place, if you're showing in the right place. And give your story to beta readers. Write your story with purpose. Have every aspect of your story be intentional. Know what you're trying to do in your story. Give it to beta readers. Have them read them. And then when they come back to you and you get their feedback, ask them, did this story do this for you? This is what I was trying to do. Did I succeed? And it's a lot of revision. It's a lot of reading out loud. It's a lot of putting stuff in, taking stuff out. It's a lot of, searching synonyms for a word on Google so that you don't use the same word over and over again. And it is really the craft of implication and the craft of knowing what to show versus tell. So that's all I have for you guys today. There are some really great short stories that I think everyone should read. I mentioned The Today I Am Paul. I mentioned 26 Monkeys, also The Abyss. Another short story that I really love is Court Bindings by Karalynn Lee, another fantasy short story. What I love about this one is that it's not true second person. The narrator is telling a story to one other person, so it is like an offset of second person. So it's a second person short story, but then the ending is so incredibly done that it just completely unraveled and changed the beginning of the story. It was a great plot twist ending. The foreshadowing for it was set up perfectly. So I'm going to link these short stories below. I'm also going to link some really great magazines that just endlessly have short stories. And then my resource for today is another Dave Farland resource because he really is the story doctor. That's the name of his website. But he has a blog post of the top 10 reasons why short stories get rejected in his Writers of the Future contest. But then he also has a blog post on why some of the short stories don't get above an honorable mention in the Writers of the Future contest. So I'll link to both of those below. If you have any personal questions, you can comment or tweet me at Camille A. Singer. And I post new videos on Fridays. So I'll see you guys then. But for now, you should be writing stuff.